Okay, so ladies and gentlemen, we are, I guess, a bit exhausted, but very happy for the nice sequencing of experience, thoughts, and anecdotes that we have heard throughout the sessions this morning and in the afternoon. I am sure that this session will not be painful, so you will be led towards the end of this conference smoothly. I must say that if I may spend 1 minute to give a very quick feedback on what I heard today. It has been indeed quite an amazing day of recombining or decombining smart specialization in pieces and in bits and pieces, and then trying to actually reshape it in different ways and customizing into the different settings that, in fact, world regions can offer. And in a way, I liked that basically one of the last speakers was my friend Marek Pżer from DG Regio, because actually we actually came back to the origin, and we see that the concept indeed was born through contribution of different scholars of different continents, and then was shaped and thrown into policy experimentation in the EU, and it has been taken up in different parts of the world, and now today we have got a lot of feedback and brought it back to the EU, and in a way, my question now would be: but what really is smart specialization? But we're not happy to just with that. We want to put something more on the table, and in fact, it's pretty much linked to the sum and try to and gatherings of all the elements that have been talked and have been put forward on the table today, which is the idea that working with both EU countries and countries all over the world, and exchanging experience with those. With regard to the application of smart specialization in shaping, implementing place-based innovation strategies, we have come to some extent to a point where we kind of increasingly see, we perceive there can be a fruitful link between smart specialization, so the methodology on one side, and the achievement of sustainable development goals. It can be, it's not basically rocket science, but it is again a combination of elements. So we keep working under the auspices of Dominique in this idea of combining policy and methodological elements. Why do I say that? Well, I say that because of mainly 5 points. Two main elements of smart specialization are, on one side, the place-based approach, which is pretty much linked to the idea of localizing SDGs. The idea that SDGs cannot be achieved but at the local level, but mobilizing local governance, local policies that are close to citizens, so close to the people that are hit by societal challenges and therefore are influenced by the achievement or non-achievement of the global agenda. And second is about innovation, and we truly believe that innovation is an element that can act as a spark in the mobilization of policies and policy action aimed at the achievement of SDGs. at the local level, putting something new, something incremental on top of the assets that we have, of the potentials that places have. And then we move to the details of smart specialization, and we see, I think, three main topics, three main again elements that are probably again quite intimately linked to the idea of tackling global goals and trying to put forward policies that are supposed to achieve those goals. One is the idea of priority setting. There has been a number of speakers today mentioning the fact that if you don't put enough money for enough time on single themes or single domains, then you risk of not achieving the critical mass which is essential in order to deliver effectively your policy action. The second point is inclusiveness, is the idea of again activating local communities or place-based communities that work together and generate policy options and policy priorities. The third element is evidence. So it is the idea of having solid data on which to base your policy decisions, on which to activate your communities, and from which then to ensure sound monitoring systems of your policy action in order to, again, feed the policy cycle back again. So this is a kind of a proposal that we put on the table. I have three. I think I can say three good friends on this stage that represent different souls of the discourse on both smart specialization and SDGs. We would like to actually hear from them and also trying to put forward this idea to the audience. We think that it is worth engaging on putting together something meaningful out of the relation between smart specialization, SDGs, and probably in between something on innovation, which probably in the UN jargon would be STI roadmaps or STI agendas. And this is the kind of proposal that we would like to discuss now. We think that there is a window of opportunity in the global agenda now to suggest that smart specialization may play a role in the achievement of the SDGs through the activation of localized STI agendas. But I will stop here. I would like to pass the floor to the first of the speakers of this session. It is Viktor Nedovic. Viktor is the State Secretary of the Ministry of Education, Science and Technological Development of the Republic of Serbia. Viktor, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Alessandro. May I have this point? Good afternoon to everyone. Yes, we will put something else today on the table related to possibilities for smart specialization to be a kind of tool for the implementation of sustainable development goals of United Nations. Not far from this moment, this year we had in Tokyo one experts meeting this year, first half of this year, when the topic was, as Alessandro mentioned, definition or development of STI, Science, Technology, Innovation Roadmaps for the achievement of Sustainable Development Goals. I was a part of that event and at that time mentioned smart specialization in my presentation and possible tool for this to achieve them. At that time, didn't know that in few months we will talk again about this important issue. I would start my presentation with a few basic information. Sorry if I repeat something you, Alessandro, already mentioned. About the smart specialization specificities, particularly that ones that are related to the territory, its territorial approach. Each region should identify and develop its own competitive advantages. Smart specialization tends to develop knowledge-based economies to this transformation of those kind of agendas and to contribute to the medium long-term development and greater territorial cohesion. And some of the key elements, keywords, are place-based, innovation-led, and inclusive. From the other side, we have Sustainable Development Goals that are several of the global goals that relate to the future social and economic development, and that call for concrete effort towards building an inclusive, sustainable, and resilient future. In that approach, a clear reference that is also based on the Agenda 21 is made to economic, environmental, and social perspectives. If we see and compare some of the goals of one and another, we have from one side regional policy contribution to the smart growth, in the case of smart specialization, keeping market forces working. We have interactive process between policy and the private sector, involving priorities, activity as the right level of intervention. I mean activities of translation of priorities into concrete plans. And one of the key words here is also process that helps to reveal areas of desirable intervention. From another side, we have achievement of the better and more sustainable future, addressing the global challenges that could be also related to the societal challenges of Horizon 2020 that is ongoing through Horizon 2020 and will be also tackled by Horizon Europe program. Focus on dimensions of sustainable development for economic, social, and environmental progress, respecting national policy and priority domains, global, seeking for the global partnerships, and respect inclusive and sustainable economic growth, especially for developing states. If you see one and another list, it could be concluded that there is a lot of opportunities for smart specialization to be a tool for achievement, to achieve the sustainable goals. But addressing the challenges related to those goals, there are some of the differences you already mentioned on a way. SDGs call for coordinated and consensual-based global action from one side, and from another side, the place-based focus of smart specialization means the approach to challenges like bottom-up one and calls for a strong implementation framework. Still, there are a lot of space for similarities, for cooperation, for involvement of S3 as a tool to achieve the goals. For example, related to diagnostics through, for example, detailed SDG mapping, then resources mobilization, particularly on the local level, then on the institutional level as well, starting from the government, going down to the local one, then stakeholder identification and mobilization, civil society inclusion in the process, design of implementation, financing, and monitoring frameworks. This is all of these are the places where smart specialization could be of, according to my opinion, great support for the implementation of the goals. I'm coming from Serbia, from the country that is candidate country of European Union, and from the country that is at the moment developing smart specialization strategy from one side and trying to be proactive in the stage of the implementation of the Sustainable Development Goals. From that perspective, I would say a few words more about how we are doing such kind of activity or trying to make the framework for that in the case of my country. Concerning some of the basic data related to Serbia, we can see from that picture that, as it is mentioned in the previous session, when one of the keynote speakers compared Europe with US, Japan, and so on. On the smaller scale, Serbia is very good producer of quality scientific research, much better than it shows capacity for innovation, much better than company spending on R&I, much better than university industry collaboration. That means we have a great potential in R&D and I sector. We should do better in connection with the economy, and one of the ways to do it is actually the smart specialization strategy or future implementation of the smart specialization strategy that will be on a way connected with the implementation of SDGs. Just to mention maybe a few details more from this slide. We are doing, for example, it's mentioned several times during the day, Horizon 2020 or Horizon Europe, the future program. Serbia is doing rather well in Horizon 2020, and this information, this data here that is presented means that in the 4 years of implementation of Horizon 2020, we succeeded to manage and to contract almost the same amount of money through the main listed projects as we did in the whole previous 7 years FP7 program. Also, University of Belgrade on the Shanghai prestigious Shanghai list is based around 300 place. Maybe it's not, it doesn't look so favorable, but that means that University of Belgrade is inside the best ones in the whole Southeast Europe, and at the same time inside the 1.5% of the best universities worldwide. This is potential. We should use on the best way this potential for both of these activities. And where we are in the development of the smart specialization, we were the first still non-European member states that expressed the interest of our European Commission towards the DG NEAR, towards JRC, to be the part of the family, smart specialization family. First, we did by one of our regions, by province Vojvodina in 2013, and Vojvodina was mapped at that time on the JRC platform for the smart specialization, and after that, Serbia as a country joined the process of smart specialization and the development of the strategy on the national level. That is ongoing process at this very moment. Together with us, and a little bit later, it was Moldova, Ukraine, Montenegro, and some other countries from Southeast Europe. At the moment, right from the beginning, the linkages and the support that came from JRC was really very strong, and I can confirm that is nowadays the situation that we are facing as well. What we did in the meantime, together with JRC, together with Fraunhofer Institute, the document of mapping of economic, innovative, and scientific potential of Serbia have been prepared and published. With the quantitative analysis, we are finalizing now a qualitative one, and we are entering the process of EDP, entrepreneurial discovery process. We will have soon one big event on 2nd of October together with the Director General of JRC, Vladimir Šuha. We will have a kind of political push towards the finalizing of this process. We are at the moment in the stage of defining of national priority domains, niches for the future interventions, and here I have the message for the Commission. At the same time, or in parallel with the development of the Smart Specialization strategy, following the methodology that is very precise one, prepared by the colleagues from the European Commission. We are trying to reserve some funds for the implementation on the national level. And we see that activity is a regular one from our side. But from another side, we are not in the same position like the regions of European Union are. We are not in the same position like member states are. We don't have approach to ESIF. We have approach to IPA funds, and the message to the Commission is to consider IPA as a possible tool to support us in the implementation of the strategy soon. We are in the stage of designing. We will be in the stage of designing by the end of the year, and probably at the beginning of the next year, we will draft the Smart Specialization strategy. From another side, Serbia and Agenda 2030. We published recently one document that is called like that, Serbia and Agenda 2030. What is stated, some of the major points, Sustainable Development Goals of the Agenda 2030 formally came into effect on January 1st, 2016. It is broadly known. The Republic of Serbia has been, this is maybe not so known, the Republic of Serbia has been selected among the other countries to support the design of a new global development agenda by consulting its citizens on their views of development of priorities. To the national campaign, the Serbia We Want, it was the part of the World We Want campaign. Over 250,000 citizens became aware of the consultation process concerning the post-2015 period. 2 rounds of consultation were held, 28,000 of citizens were included, and Serbia is presently in process of establishing the institutional framework for monitoring and the achievement of SDGs, as well as the mapping of existing strategic framework against or vis-a-vis SDGs as a departure point for dialogue and decision-making process on the prioritization of SDGs. And all of this together, Smart Specialization from one side and SDG from another, is connected on a way with our EU integration process. We are pursuing the EU integration agenda, which provides a platform to integrate SDGs in mutually reinforcing agenda. Given the EU integration as Serbia's strategic goal, and all reforms are geared towards the goal, there is full consensus to implement the Sustainable Development Goals through the EU integration process. And this document I mentioned is actually explaining which strategic framework we already developed for some of the SDGs. From that document, 4 groups of the goals are created, and particularly for the first one, economic growth, there is a strong link of industry policy and future smart specialization towards the achievement of the economic growth according to the document that is published. And in the conclusion of this document, economic growth, in particular in the area of medium and small size enterprises and so on, is calling of drafting of several strategic documents, and among them, strategy for smart specialization is explicitly mentioned. That means we see smart specialization strategy as a tool for many other activities than just this one, more than this one, but it is like it is stated in the document itself. The synergy which appear among these two will be based on several important elements like indicators that should be harmonized and measurable, like measures to increase the percentage of GDP. We are doing that on behalf of our ministry. We succeeded to increase our budget in 2018 in comparison with 2017 for 15%. We are still discussing some incentives as additional activities, and also in this part of building capacity related to the human one, we recently had a call to include 1,000 young people, talents, PhD students in our research and innovation system, and what we did up to now is 830 people are already included. Concerning infrastructure issues, we are by the end of the development of a research infrastructure roadmap. We are identifying the centers of excellence. There should be also the point of cooperation of research community with the industry in our case, and tool for the implementation on SDGs in the future. That's all in my intervention. Thank you very much for listening.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Victor. It has been a very interesting presentation. I do remember Vojvodina being the first non-EU regions to subscribe to the Smart Specialization platform some time ago. And I must say, from your presentation, I might keep the very interesting issue of indicators, mapping, diagnostics. I mean, that is a very key point for both smart specialization and indeed having a meaningful strategy in order to achieve the SDGs. Thank you. I would move now to Fernando Santiago Rodriguez. Fernando works at the Directorate of External Relations and Policy Research at UNIDO. And, well, the floor is yours.
Thank you. And let me start again. Thank you to the organizers for giving the opportunity to share some of the activities that we conduct. We don't really have a language or a framework in the smart specialization. We do a lot of work, as we're saying now, place-based innovation, and we really focus, for those of you who are not familiar with the organization, it's just, I'm not going to go through all the slides in detail, but we are a specialized agency. The mandate we have is to foster and support member states interested in fostering industrial development through different activities, technical capacity, that's the bulk of the activities, but we also have this function, the policy function and research function, and that's why maybe the reason why I'm here to sort of really understand what the dynamics of the smart specialization is. And I think what we have here broadly defined, the idea is we have a conception of what industrial development should be in terms of inclusive, sustainable, and strong, right? And so the challenge the organization has placed itself is to balance these three objectives. Yes, we want economic development. We want it in a way that is inclusive, it's sustainable. And I will more of explain a bit more of that. But the idea here is how we connect this to the smart specialization and to the SDGs. I think that's an interesting question. And it's an interesting question because of the landscape in which we are now. And you were already mentioning some of that. With the 2015 development agenda, right, with the Addis Abeba, we see that science, technology, and innovation has been identified as one of the areas that is going to be fundamental for us as a sort of society, global society, to achieve what is a very ambitious set of development goals, right? Sustainable development goals, 17 of them. We faced difficulties achieving the global development goals, and now we're putting even more. But I think science and technology, and we are also understanding this is a multidimensional problem. Agencies like UNIDO and maybe UNESCO, the same, which have a very specific mandate or activity in science and technology, are sort of called to be active and engaging. And of course, we cannot do everything. And each of the agencies are specialized. And I put some dots in the areas where we're mostly involved. The agency has, for natural reasons, specialized in SDG 9, industrialization, innovation, and resilient infrastructure. But that doesn't mean that we don't do other work, right? So now, why I think it's interesting, the question that we are placing on the debate for this kind of session, because we have seen the need to, the member states agreed that they need to be more explicit in their efforts around science and technology. Yeah, there is these debates around how to actually embed science and technology as part of the development strategies, and that's a commitment that the member states put forward. And so now we are faced with how we help them do that. And as you started mentioning, this interagency task team, where some of us are involved, and I think this is an area where I think smart specialization strategies become interesting. This is actually a crowded place. There is many kinds of strategies, technology assessments, STI development strategies. We also do some industrial policy analysis, and of course, science and technology innovation capacities are important. And so we are on this discussion, in these debates. I think it's a very interesting moment for a community like this to engage with the UN system and the communities around them, to really try to assess the value of methodologies like this. What is vis-a-vis other, can we develop synergies? Where is it that we can find complementarities? And of course, how can we make this a practical tool for member states? I think that's an interesting point. And for agencies like UNIDO, this is also an interesting area because we are also thinking on our own strategy. We do a lot of work on clusters, industrial parks, all sorts of industrial parks, ecological parks, science parks, but we don't have this sort of element that help us articulate a discourse and a dialogue. So the question here is, can we use this idea of smart specialization as one possible venue to articulate those instances? And we are also thinking on moving forward, right? How do we actually include, or how do we actually use this kind of dialogue, or is it possible to use this kind of methodology to assist member states who are interested, again, in fostering this idea of inclusive, sustainable industrial development? And we are looking into different areas. You see sustainable cities. We are interested in gender, in Industry 4.0, and circular economy. And so these are strategies that are emerging within the organizations. Again, the idea that we have also is, can we have a strategy, a strategic framework for science and technology that encompasses all these areas that, help us do some kind of internal reflection and systematize and consolidate efforts. So I think those are the areas where I think there is, of course, the importance of indicators, the importance of methodologies, the importance of how do we actually develop the stories that go from an intervention, say industrial parks, to the actual achievement of something that relates to one of the Sustainable Development Goals. And I think that's what I think I would like to see more of the work of this community. And I've been checking some of the work that, specifically in the area of entrepreneurial development process. I think that's a key issue here, and I heard some speakers before me try to sort of, this is one of the areas that is a strength, it's a novelty for the framework. But still I see some challenges, and I think some people are kind of shying the idea, civil society, how to engage civil society, how to go about fostering these multi-stakeholder processes. For us, when we do the technical assistance around policy making, sometimes that's the difficult discourse. We ask governments to engage with civil society or with broader stakeholders, and so how do we do that? How do we validate the engagement? How do we validate the knowledge? And I think I've seen some of the work in the JRC where they start asking, so how do we actually validate? How much is civil society involved? And to what extent involving civil society takes away the power, right? From some of the researcher, it takes it to the community, and then can you really engage in an equal footing with that, right? And so I think if that's a kind of, if you allow me to bring sort of my researcher kind of thinking here, I think what sounds, it's some of the debates that we have already seen, and I was very, very happy to, see this openness. This is a concept that you develop in Europe, and you are testing in Europe, you are trying to share with some other regions, but you're willing to learn. So let me bring some 3 lessons coming from different countries, and you might be familiar with some of them. I think moving forward and focusing on this specific topic of the entrepreneurial development process, or discovery process, sorry. I think this idea of discovery, it's very much in the place of how do we do things. But I think it needs a balance between how much do we allow things to be top-down, bottom-up, and what is the role of this. I think this is the debates. Maybe you're familiar with this sort of the STEPS Center, right? Where they think that if you leave innovation processes or discovery process to move in the direction that it's a free movement, basically you are risking moving more into the idea of competitiveness, privileging those that have already the abilities. If you are a policymaker, you want to make sure that your money is well spent, and basically you want to have results, sometimes quick results. So there is a lot of efforts around competitiveness, or some people say global challenges need science and technology, right? We were talking about here engaging bottom-up, so citizen solutions, on how can we engage those communities, right? Can we list some of the ideas? And that's a debate that is going on for some time. And I think to what extent this idea of smart specialization allows these spaces for communities to engage and to also provide directions of where innovation should go. If we allow innovation to just flourish, that's the winner takes all, sometimes the game, okay? And how to actually engage with civil society. Again, and some years ago, we had this emergence of manifestos everywhere, right? The Science, Technology, Innovation Manifesto. And I think, let me just point out the one in India, where I think resonates with some of the discussion that you had this morning. To what extent scientific knowledge is the only way to get at solutions, and to what extent having a scientific degree or a Nobel Prize gives you the expertise and makes you someone who really knows what the solution is, without understanding that somebody from experience or somebody from the region, right? And this is the idea of democratizing knowledge and giving value to sort of local knowledge, indigenous knowledge, and to the practices, right? And so it really is questioning the value of scientific knowledge as the only way to get at the solutions. And in this idea of fostering discovery processes, I think this is a very interesting challenge that as research community and policymaking community, you need to validate, okay? And finally, again, how do we go about engaging with civil society? How do we go about engaging with different stakeholders? We need to understand this is, some people who are already starting to think of these questions, how is it that different communities, right, contribute to decision-making around science, technology, and innovation policy? And that is a debate that creates a space to debate about what is the origin, what is the spaces, why are people talking, what is the problem that people want to solve. Some of the issues that we face frequently in our work is we go to the governments and they say, we want you to help us to do clusters, and we want you to help us to create some industrial parks. Sorry, Minister, what is the problem you want to solve? And how can you be so sure that an industrial park is the best answer, right? So we are facing, we have solutions in search for problems, right? So these communities and these debates, I think there's work already emerging in how to validate in terms of the scope, in terms of the power relationships that are embedded in these processes. When you have a discovery but you don't have the power, you might have a great idea and the greatest need, but somebody there is going to shout your voice, right? So I think these are some of the, if you allow me to sort of share some of these frameworks, I mean, more of the analytical aspects in terms of one of the dimensions that I mentioned at the beginning is the inclusiveness dimension of development. So I think I hear a lot of discussion around how to be more competitive, how to bridge productivity gaps. Of course, environment is an area there. I haven't heard much discussion, but I think this idea of inclusiveness connected to some of the SDGs, it's an important dimension that I think this community needs to reflect a bit more. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Fernando. It has been a very inspirational presentation, I must say. I am pretty sympathetic, personally speaking, of the inclusiveness character of smart specialization, and I do believe it is a feature that has brought about a change in the way place-based innovation policies have been managed in a number of European regions, and therefore I think there are lessons to take stock of and learn about this in smart specialization. By the way, in December we will actually present one session at the Science Forum South Africa conference exactly on the point of inclusiveness of the smart specialization methodology. So we'll have more opportunities to discuss this specific point. And let me just come back to one of the points you mentioned in the first part of your presentation, which is the idea of pilot methodologies to advance STI roadmaps for SDGs. Well, probably this is one point where we have the most of the opportunities to influence a kind of policy setting, or at least mention or inclusion of smart specialization in a number of recommended methodologies to be used in achieving SDGs through SDI roadmaps. And finally, I would like to pass the floor to Ernesto Fernandez Polkuch. Ernesto is the Chief of Section for Science Policy and Partnerships at UNESCO. Last but, of course, not least, please.
Thank you, Alessandro. Thank you, first of all, for the invitation, for having the opportunity to speak at this workshop. Allow me to also mention something that I mentioned in private, but that we should make an effort to not have all-men panels, and it's not my most comfortable sitting here, but I understand that it's not always easy when we represent organizations, but allow me to, I need to mention that. I wanted to make a point very briefly on the relationship between science, technology, innovation, and the SDGs, because I think that the SDGs have provided us with a new opportunity that when those of us who have been working on science, technology, innovation issues for some time, and we had to justify or to explain our work in the framework of the MDGs of the previous UN framework, had quite some difficult time to explain why science, technology, innovation should be a priority. The SDGs give us a different framework, and I would like to say that we could say that that science, technology, innovation is in the SDGs, is inside the SDGs, explicitly, like in Goal 9 or the Target 9.5, so extremely explicitly as part of the SDGs. At the same time, it's very clear how STI is a tool for the SDGs, how none of the SDGs basically, or most of the SDGs, cannot be attained without science, technology, and innovation. And in that sense, both, again, come back to this, to an idea that we have that the SDGs are for science and technology. So the SDGs back us up. The SDGs are a support for science, technology, and innovation, and that, well, it's a nice framework. So in that sense, how to relate the SDGs with any STI policy approaches already is a more open situation than we had before. And at UNESCO, when you showed the 17 SDGs, and we practically have to contribute to all of them in education, science, culture, communication. So overall, the organization is very complex, but in terms of when we go into the Science, Technology, Innovation Policy Program, it was very interesting to hear the debates today and to read the papers, because we are very much in line with the principles of smart specialization in various ways and in various, I would like to point out, starting from the importance of evidence as a starting point, the inclusive approach, the broad view of innovation, and to some extent the context-based approach relating to capacity building. So I would like to go quickly through all this, also because I have to catch a plane, so I will be quick. The first point about evidence, and here I would like to make an important point, because the data deficit that the colleagues from Brazil and also before already mentioned, I think that this is related. It's not only a data deficit, but it's an evidence deficit. It's a deficit of information beyond data, and we're working on that through a couple of instruments. One of which is our Science and Technology Innovation Program at the UNESCO Institute for Statistics, where we collect. We're the agency responsible globally for R&D and other STI data. So there is a database that is as good as the data that come from the countries. So we are doing a big effort in improving the quality of this data and working with member states on improving those data. But of course, it's difficult to get the whole picture of which data are really needed in this context. And the conversation we also had a little bit with our colleague from Brazil about the difficulty of having all those data that we need. In that sense, the UIS, the UNESCO Institute for Statistics, is now producing a specific set of indicators for S&T for SDGs. This is a process that is ongoing, and a draft will be available soon, so we will share with you soon. These indicators and other information feed a global report that is called the UNESCO Science Report, that we publish every 5 years, and the UNESCO Science Report is a good way, because the last one was published in 2015, so it's a pre-SDGs. The next one will directly deal with monitoring 9.5, the target on R&D, and other targets related in the Sustainable Development Goals. And the third part is a platform that we call GoSpin, which is the Global Observatory of Science Policy Instruments, which deals a little bit with this concept of evidence beyond data, where we're collecting, in a sense, like ERA Watch, or maybe the Rio project, or the STIP, the way policies are implemented, the policies and the way the policies are implemented in member states throughout the world. So this platform is going to be presented in November, and it has both the qualitative and the quantitative indicators, and will enable for a number of different analyses on these issues. And out of the GoSpin process, we also produce country profiles, which, on demand of the member states, we have produced a number of profiles that should help ignite these processes, like the smart specialization processes. It produces the basis for the STI policies, all these debates about STI policy implementation. And I think that it would be also a good starting point for smart specialization processes. We have done one for Rwanda, which was we had here our colleague from Rwanda, and And Rwanda was one of the countries where we have worked on this issue. The second issue is the inclusiveness. In that sense, we have to strengthen the gender variable, but also to incorporate, and it was mentioned here already, the TVET, the TVET, the technical, not TVET, the country or the region, but the technical and vocational education and training, which is another of the areas of work of UNESCO in this area, and youth, civil society, different approaches, including the approaches of towards indigenous knowledge systems, like colleague Fernando mentioned. Another point is the broad view of innovation. I picked up a couple of wordings that I heard today from you: grassroots innovation from Côte d'Ivoire, frugal innovation from India, social innovation, a colleague from South Africa. All these different approaches that we need to consider as part of the clear, not just as a complement of innovation, but part of these strategies that we need to put in place. This, of course, brings us the problem, and I think the colleague from Australia mentioned the lack of innovation surveys. Well, we have even a bigger difficulty when we want to survey innovation and incorporate all these concepts and produce evidence around that. So this, for the challenge, is part of this presentation. And the last brief point about capacity building and in relation particularly with the UN processes that also were discussed already, the interagency task teams. We are working very closely with the Technology Bank for LDCs, which was established by the UN in 2017. It was the first target of the SDGs that was achieved. There was one target established, the Technology Bank, so that was achieved. And this year, we're starting to work with the Technology Bank on country profiles on science technology policy in 5 LDCs. And we should look into the viability of incorporating the smart specialization view into these exercises too. The exercise incorporates a component of technology needs assessment, and maybe there also one could rather go for a smart specialization look, taking into account that the technology needs assessment is a very broad concept that might mean everything or nothing depending on how we look into it. So maybe we can follow up on this and see if we agree with also with the Technology Bank on using the smart specialization approach to covering the technology needs assessment part. The STI roadmaps, this is the other component, and also mentioned by the colleagues. We were discussing also with Alessandro that smart specialization could be a very interesting tool for the STI roadmaps, and currently we're working on a guide on a guidebook on STI roadmaps. It's a strange type of guidebook because it's a guidebook to something that basically no one has ever done. So it's the guidebook of the unknown, but it's basically a first guidebook towards how to establish roadmaps. And there are of course, some methodologies, and I think that smart specialization could occupy an interesting space there. So. The conclusions I've noted here, that both the mission-oriented and participative and evidence-based approach of smart specialization, as we said, are critical to achieving SDGs and are in line with the UNESCO strategy and with UNESCO approaches. So we should really keep that in mind and bring it into our conversations in the future. In terms of opportunities, we are willing and we are happy to bring forward the tools that we've been developing to share in this conversation, the platforms, the GoSpin and other platforms and tools that we have developed, and maybe we can look at adapting GoSpin to incorporate further smart specialization activities, and look for also, as I said, the collaboration with the roadmaps. Now I would like to put very briefly a few challenges that I think are still there pending. One is we have to bring in a stronger gender perspective in smart specialization. I think this is, we haven't seen it during the day, I haven't seen it in the documents, and I think this is a challenge. Another challenge is how to incorporate South-South cooperation and the interaction between the different experiences that have been also shown today. There is another challenge which talks about this contrast between a methodology designed for a region versus a national approach that would probably fit most least developed countries, which is this conversation between specialization and diversification, or between more science and more entrepreneurship, which means I was discussing a metaphor about we cannot do a specialization without graduating first. So it's getting to the specialization phase of a career. If we do a parallelism with higher education, does need the title graduation first. And if we are to leapfrog the graduation part, we need to really look into what happens with the quality of higher education. So we need to really make sure that the research capacities are not abandoned, that we have capacities for science advice, for bringing science to policy overall in the system. So in a sense, not abusing the specialization, but keeping a balance between specialization and the basic graduation skills. And maybe the last one, it's already there, but this maybe in a more theoretical area, to how to discuss the concept of specialization with of the methodology with the indivisibleness. How do you say that in English? Indivisibleness, that we cannot divide the SDGs. The SDGs are all or nothing. We have been conceptually supporting this idea that the SDGs are all or nothing. So we have to find a conceptual bridge between specializing, if we can specialize in regions, but how do we specialize in countries if we have to, if the SDGs are an all of nothing or nothing challenge. So we need to build that bridge, and I really welcome the challenge that Alessandro has brought forward in terms of working together in analyzing these problems. So thank you very much.
Thank you very much. There is indeed more on the table now than half an hour ago. And this is actually challenging. Ernesto, you have really put challenges and also potentials on the table, which is very very intriguing and very promising, I think, for the work to come. I cannot take all the points that you mentioned. Probably I would like to take two points. One is the broad view of innovation. I think this is also an intrinsical element of what a smart specialization is, or what innovation can bring inside a smart specialization strategy. We have been working with lagging regions in the European Union, but also with countries of the neighborhood and regions of those countries where, in fact, you cannot think of having, not even, let alone Silicon Valleys, but even probably a couple of institutions that can ignite the innovation ecosystem. So there you have actually to work on the nitty-gritty of the real potential of what can really be done with the people in those regions, with the assets that those regions have. I mean, you talked about the vocational training, but this is also probably one of the key issues. The second point is the STI roadmaps and the guidebook. Probably we have quickly talked before. This is really one of the points where we might wish to focus our joint work, and one of the possibilities that we have to influence the debate at UN level on how to achieve SDGs through STI roadmaps. If you allow me, I would just suggest that we try to decode all the information that we have got now, and suggest and come back to you suggesting a kind of skeleton of what we could develop in the next few weeks and months, taking account of the deadlines that we might face. And if it's fine with you, I would probably immediately look for questions and comments from the audience, if any. I think time is tough. There is one. Please.
Sorry, it's again me. I'm Alex Kleibrink. I work for the JRC here in Seville. I have a quick question to UNIDO, because I know UNIDO, together with GIZ, developed a toolbox for industrial policy, kind of evidence-based. And I heard from different people mixed feedback. So what was your experience of bringing evidence into industrial policy? What can we learn for our current exercise? Thanks.
Yeah, thanks. This is called the EQUIP program. It is a tool to help member states who are interested in developing a new industrial policy or improving industrial policies, and they have no capacities or experience. What is the challenge there is, it's an interesting tool because it draws from publicly available databases on trade and value addition, and some of the databases that we produce internally. And that's a methodology is computing an index that UNIDO computes every year on industrial competitiveness, and that helps member states to assess their performance. What is the difficulty there? The difficulty there is if we put a platform up there, we assume that people on the receiving side, at the receiving end, are able to use it, and that's not necessarily the case. I think in the context of where we're working here is we tend to assume that policymakers are ready to undertake any new methodology, and they can just, a bit of exposure, and then they are ready to go and run with whatever we want them to do. And I think that's not the case. I think what we learn from that is you really need to make an effort to build something that you already been stressed is capacity building, knowledge sharing, and I think fostering some of the sharing experiences of how different countries have been using that database to improve it, and also to be able to capture part of the learning. And that's, I think, what we are trying to do now, to incorporate some of the feedback that we have received from member states and try to expand. I think what is an important tool there is meant not to be just an analytical tool. It's meant to be, for us, a training tool, right? And so I think that some of the issues that we have discussed here need to be thought in the sense of people out there are not ready as some of us are, or some of you are, in terms of the methodologies, and you have to go back, step down a bit, and be ready to engage with some of those communities to help them get to the point. That's the only way. People cannot tell you the value of smart specialization if they don't really understand if it's painful, if it's actually something that is good. Thank you.
Thank you. Any other question? Yes, there is one hand raised. Yes.
Thank you. Just a comment, and really a lot of good ideas coming from this presentation. Earlier on, I tried to struggle, when I was up there, I tried to struggle with this idea that, okay, in developing countries, especially those ones where we're trying to play catch up, yes, smart specialization is really a great idea, but there is also a lot of foundational needs, where now when you talk about smart specialization, trying to develop those areas that you need, rather than just those areas that you need to compete in, then you find that it's everything that you need. So that then it brings this question of smart specialization is absolutely a great idea. But how do you develop that in areas where the rest of us come from, where we are still behind? How do you develop that along with trying to build a foundational base? Now, the reason I bring it in just now is because Ernesto just put it in an even smarter language. He just redefined the question. And the redefinition is this. And obviously, the Commission will have to think about how to put this in context. And the question is, okay, smart specialization is great, but then you have SDGs. And developing countries, a lot of SDGs need to actually be worked out. In other words, if you go to Spain, you'll find, okay, Spain needs to really work strongly on a few SDGs because, you know, it's well off already on others. But if you come where I come from, then you find, or the SDGs, is 17 or something, you need to work on most of them. And at the same time, the idea of smart specialization is good. So I think there is a need for the Commission to sit down and say, okay, how do we work with these places? Like I said, I think Ernesto just, he just put his finger on the problem. Yeah, so I think there is some work for you guys because the two ideas are good. SDGs, it's SDGs, you have to take them as quantum. You can't divide them, especially in areas where we come from. But smart specialization is also a great idea. So take the two and come up with a model that works. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you very much. I don't know if any of the speakers would like to take up this point. On my side, I must say I do agree with what you say. It is very challenging to find a model that works. But I must say, smart specialization has some features that allow it to be shaped the way you would like it to be shaped, and not the way we would like it to be shaped. So that is something that I think can, if does not answer to your comment, it can kind of trace a path where we might find some kind of shared solution on that. Any other raised hand? No? So I would like to just make two further points. The first one is I would like to invite you to give a round of applause to these great panelists. And the second one, I am very pleased to invite Charlina Viceva, Deputy Director General of the Joint Research Center, to give her closing remarks to this conference. Thank you. Thank you.